There's an area on the Chestnut Ridge called Gray Station. I've been there several times, and it's an area of high strangeness. One of my favorite encounters stories comes from that region. There's a woman that was out one morning on her morning jog, and she sees a Sasquatch throw a deer over its shoulder and walk off along the train tracks into the woods. But also, there were stories from Fayette County, which is, real close to the Westmoreland area, of a dragon being seen on the Chestnut Ridge. A dragon. It's just fascinating stuff. I want to say 2010 to probably 2018, we were getting reports of these flying rays pretty consistently. A couple times a year, we were getting reports of these. And to me, that's a strange anomaly in itself. Like, is there some sort of flying ray? Like, would it be beyond the realm of some sort of flying fish?
I mean, I don't know. I feel like we've just thrown ourselves down the rabbit hole of weirdness of Chestnut Ridge already.
You're right. And we haven't even talked about the Bigfoot the lady shot outside her trailer that exploded into light. But there's so much more there that's beneath the surface that people haven't seen, and so much more that hasn't been shared that I don't know if you could do 10 seasons on the Chestnut Ridge and it would even share all the stories of what's happened in that place. Considered you could talk to many different prominent researchers in PA and experiencers and still get stories. But it's just insane.
So one of the aspects that really fascinates me about Bigfoot is the connection to actual locations. There are certain regions that just seem to be these meccas of all types of unexplained phenomenon. You don't have just a single thing taking place. You have multiple things. You have Bigfoot, you have UFOs, you have haunted locations, all in the same areas. You also have those areas all over the United States. There's even one in Oklahoma. Last time I had Sean Forker on as a guest, I wanted to talk to him about one of those locations that I knew he would be familiar with, but we didn't have time. So I've brought Sean back to talk about the infamous Chestnut Ridge. Sean, welcome back to Bigfoot Crossroads.
Oh, well, thank you, Matt. And you've picked a great place to talk about Chestnut Ridge.
Chestnut Ridge.
Chestnut Ridge. Chestnuts. What a crazy place, man. It doesn't get much weirder than that. And many places, around the country, there's a few places that you could say are areas of high strangeness, but I don't know if any of them have the concentration that the Chestnut Ridge does. Westmoreland, Fayette counties, down the southern tier of PA as it works its way into West Virginia and Maryland. It's just crazy. And the things that happen there, man, are just, no pun intended, out of this world.
I really had no idea the scope of Chestnut Ridge geographically or what was actually going on there. I told you, hey, I thought there was like a couple of documentaries that Small Town Monsters did. I know you were involved in those about Chestnut Ridge, but there's like 5 or 6. It's like Seth Breedlove got tons and tons and tons of footage and just started cranking these things out. And it's just story after story after story. If you don't mind, just first of all, explain what Chestnut Ridge actually is.
Well, the Chestnut Ridge, the twilight zone of PA, it's also the Laurel Highlands, which is the westernmost ridge of the Alleghenies Mountains that goes into southwest PA and into northern West Virginia. It's just endless hills and mountains, and it's just an amazing place. And I can't tell you why this area has such a proclivity to the weirdness that happens, but it happens, and it happens frequently. And I wish I could tell you it has slowed down, but it has not. Now, you said about Seth Breedlove and Small Town Monsters, really diving in there. It's really close to where they're headquartered out of, too. So that helps. Like, why go across the country chasing monsters when you could lean in next door and just jump right into one of the most concentrated areas of strangeness on the East Coast? And it's, probably it's about a 75-mile range, probably more, of when you start factoring it going up northernly, but it's a long slew of mountains. And the other thing is, the Laurel Highlands, there's also some caverns that pepper through there, which have had some activity over the years. When I was out filming Sasquatch on Earth, the first season of Sasquatch on Earth, The Ridge, which is all about the Chestnut Ridge, we had learned some interesting factoids about some creatures that were said to inhabit. Sometimes, we hear about these creatures popping in and up out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. We hypothesize, well, how do we know they're not popping it up out of nowhere, out of a entrance or exit to a cave that they know that we just don't know where it's at? Sometimes we don't get into these cave systems and map them out and walk through them for a menagerie of reasons, safety probably the predominant one. But if they know of all these entries and exits of these caves of this cavern system, that subterranean, it could be a subterranean highway for them to be able to move across that region virtually undetected until they choose to, surface and do their thing.
Yeah, something that interested me right off the bat with it was that the area, I guess, is primarily limestone, but then you also have lots of quartz. You've got lots of coal mines, lots of caves. And I mean, whenever you start mentioning those things, along with the waterways in the area and the springs and everything else, I mean, those are like just going down the checklist of things that you often find in areas of high strangeness. I don't know if they have anything to do with it, but it's certainly there.
Well, we speculate that quartz has a lot to do with it, something about how that mineral retains energy. Mm-hmm. And it's remarkable about how many places you see that there's paranormal activity. There's also a high concentration of quartz. So it makes sense that it would be there. This high strangeness occurs. For what reason? We have no idea. It's just speculation. But, we start drawing parallels geologically. You have to look at these things. You talk about waterways, right there. It's a good source of navigation and food, right? Waterways usually lead to things needing to drink, things needing to migrate through that water, such as fish, there's food sources. And what better way to, sustain oneself than follow these food sources, using these caverns for shelter and go virtually across that entire region undetected. There's also, train systems that run through there. So there's also man-made navigational routes that, oftentimes we associate with Sasquatch. These and not recently with these hoax videos, but there's an area on the Chestnut Ridge called Gray Station. I've been there several times, and it's an area of high strangeness. One of my favorite encounters stories comes from that region. There's a woman that was out one morning on her morning jog, and she sees a Sasquatch throw a deer over its shoulder and walk off along the train tracks into the woods. They just picked the deer up from alongside the train tracks. Now think about that. In this particular area near the Torrance Hospital, there's a soybean field, there's train tracks, then there's woods, okay? And now you have these deer that are obviously going to feed on the soybean, right? Or what else is other vegetation is over there. They get hit by these trains. Now Bigfoot's got itself a hot free lunch with expending little energy, goes over, picks up the roadkill or the train kill, throws it over its shoulders and disappears for a nice hot breakfast.
I was going to ask you, which, I mean, you kind of gave away the answer right there, but what is your theory about the association between Bigfoot and train tracks? Do you think they're just using it as a food source or a travel route or maybe a little bit of both?
I think a combination of both. I mean, you factor where these trains, train tracks are placed, usually in wooded, farmish areas, right? Rural areas.
Right.
They cut through the terrain. Again, not often frequented by people unless you're a passenger on the train, and not a lot of people travel by rail through these places anymore. It's really more for the shipping of goods. So unless you're an employee, like, what are your odds of being discovered? And like I said, the accidents that happen along these things with the deer, they're just getting picked off left and right. When you're a creature that depends on those types of food for survival and you can get it with expending less energy, I would be going that route as well, right? Also, again, an area where you can get through undetected. So I think there's a multitude of reasons why train tracks are popular. I think that's one of the reasons. And, I think there's an untapped area for us to do some research into that, Matt, of how many sightings have happened via train and how many sightings are still out there that we could potentially solicit from people who have worked in the rail system that have seen some things that, haven't made itself to the public yet.
Yeah. Years ago, I was in contact with a guy who worked as a train engineer. And he said people see crazy stuff all the time on the railroad tracks. And I believe, I don't think it was him, but he did tell me about someone that he talked to that worked for the train system, another engineer that had a Bigfoot sighting one night. And so I think about train tracks as a little kid. I like to walk the train tracks. There was some train tracks by, one of my mom's old apartments, and I used to walk the train tracks there. Up at the lake, I had walked train tracks. Other little kids were always walking the train tracks. You find all kinds of cool stuff along train tracks, just trash and debris that falls off the trains. And then also the way that they cut through the landscape like that. A lot of those train kills happen because whenever you have those cut throughs like that and the trees are gone, it allows for other vegetation to grow on the outskirts of the train tracks. And that's the type of vegetation that deer and other smaller animals oftentimes feed on.
Right.
So, it just makes sense if you think like a booger, if you think like Bigfoot, to use these train tracks for all they can, or even just a form of entertainment, or just walking along them to see what they can find. I can see numerous reasons why they would be drawn to these train tracks.
Right. And if it was just the train tracks, that would be one thing. But, you go to an area, Matt, where, at least to my knowledge, that I know, the first report that I know of came from 1945 in that area from two hunters. And then you don't go and get another Bigfoot sighting in that area till like 1969. That is in a database. Now, I'm pretty sure if I looked at Dr. Paul Johnson's books or Stan Gordon's, I could probably find some earlier cases, but the one that comes to my mind was 1945. It was a couple guys out hunting that hear a strange cry, and it attacked the hunting dogs. And they didn't see the animal that attacked it, but they heard the strange cry. And then you go years without anything. And it's funny how all of a sudden, 1970, here's where the sightings start happening. There's that big flap in 73. And then another flap, I would say, probably in 1981. But what's interesting about the 73 flap is that's the one that's the most famous, because that's the one that's also associated with a lot of UFO activity, right?
Yeah.
And the Westmoreland County UFO flap of Bigfoot flap in 1973 was a big event. That one started getting national attention from the newspapers.
The 70s in general were probably the hottest decade for Bigfoot, if not Bigfoot and UFO activity in the United States. That's the $1 million question. Why is it? Why do you think?
Well, you're now coming off the Patterson film.
Mm-hmm.
And the Patterson film was finally out there for a little while. I think it, unlike today, I don't think we appreciate how long it took news to travel.
Right.
You don't have instant access to information. It just didn't happen. You still had party lines and telephones, CB radios. You had wires. You had, the methods of communication were not as evolved as they are today. So it took a lot longer for news to spread. But also in the 70s in Arkansas, you have something else going on too, right? The legend of Bucky Creek. You have the Fouke monster starting to make its way around. Now, what's interesting is 1973 in Bucky Creek, you don't have stories of UFOs associated with the Bigfoot creature, right? And for the longest time, it was always funny to me how it really seemed like UFO and Bigfoot was insular to Pennsylvania. And then also, in the 2000s, late 90s, 2000s, when shows like Sightings and stuff take off, you start getting more reports of high strangeness. But for the longest time, it was really perceived to be an East Coast thing with the Bigfoot UFO flap and the Bigfoot UFO connection. But that's because in 1973, and Stan Gordon, he says so in Invasion on Chestnut Ridge, the Small Town Monsters movie. And just a general conversation I had with Stan, if he wasn't getting a phone call about a UFO report, he was getting a phone call about a Bigfoot. And they weren't just coming in from, because he had a hotline going, they weren't coming in from just people. He was getting phone calls from law enforcement to go and check this out.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So it was taken a lot seriously, a lot more serious than it would be today.
Yeah.
Think about putting that situation in 1973 in the middle of 2023. Think about that now. How many years has it been? This year would technically be 50 years of the flap.
Yeah.
50 years of the flap. And, nobody's made a big deal about that. I think we should jump on that one, buddy. 50 years of the flap. And we haven't had another incident like that of such, profound impact. If you put that event into today, I think it would be taken a lot more differently.
Just sitting here thinking, I wonder how much of the stuff going on in Pennsylvania boosted those numbers of the 70s. It would be interesting to see how many reports came from outside of Pennsylvania during the 70s.
And I'd have to take a look, but I can tell you there's at least hundreds of reports that came out of the Chestnut Ridge region themselves through the entirety of the 1970s, at least probably 100 in 1973.
Well, I remember in, one of those documentaries, I'm pretty sure it was Stan Gordon that said, the UFO reports of 73 started January 1st and continued until the last day of the year. Just every day.
It's a busy year for sure.
That's crazy, man. That's crazy.
But what's crazy to me is thinking about trying to investigate on that level. And there's no handbook for that.
No.
So, Stan is just out there. Really, when you think of a pioneer, you get all these big names out there, but Stan Gordon's really often overlooked, I feel, as an investigator. When he was really a pioneer in a lot of this, people weren't thinking about Bigfoot UFO connections. People were afraid to even talk about Bigfoot back in that time. So the people that were out investigating that were really kind of serious researchers. Now imagine being the guy that's also going to say, well, you know what, I'll do you one better. I'll investigate your Bigfoot, but I'll investigate your UFOs too. And so it would probably be very easy for Stan to be laughed at by people and to be not taken seriously, considering it was a lot more conservative back then than it is today. But he's managed to do that now for over 50 years.
And he hasn't given up yet.
No, he's 81 years old.
81?
Yeah.
Wow.
And he's still sharp as a tack, still sharp. And I just, outside of Pennsylvania and that East Coast, I don't think he gets enough respect that he deserves for the work that he's done out there. And, he is very private about it too. He shares the outcomes, but he doesn't share a lot of the information with just anybody. You have to really earn your trust.
I was familiar with who he was and everything because of the Bigfoot world and I guess his connection to it. But I didn't really have any idea how in-depth and how long his research had been going on, especially with the UFO stuff.
Kecksburg, right?
Yeah. I mean, in my mind, anything related to the theory of Bigfoot being connected to UFOs or whatever has happened since I started researching. That's how everybody thinks, whenever they hear something for the first time, that's the first time it's ever been said. But to hear that he was hearing reports, noticing patterns back in the 70s even,
Yeah, well, it was him. It was Dr. Paul Johnson, who's a man that virtually is not heard of by anybody, who's a good man, a decent man. He's a retired chemistry professor from Duquesne University. Him, Joan Jeffers, is somebody nobody hears about, and somebody I would really like to, when I finish my book, there's going to be a good portion of it about Joan. Joan was a nurse who investigated UFO and Bigfoot activity in the 70s. She was a woman. And unfortunately, I think just through the years, Dr. Paul has referenced her quite a bit, but nobody has referenced her work. And she was a very important component of Pennsylvania Bigfoot and Pennsylvania UFO research because she was a boots on the ground investigator. And she was one of the first women that were actually there doing this, and a very professional woman at that.
What was your first introduction to Chestnut Ridge and the stuff that was going on there?
Well, it was in the books, Sasquatch, The Apes Among Us. There's a chapter called Eastern Action where he references Stan Gordon in there. But then when I became old enough to use the internet, right, I started, putting in searches for Bigfoot UFOs. Of course, Stan was on Unsolved Mysteries. But even then, outside of Kecksburg, PA, when you're 11 years old, 120 miles away, it might as well be California.
Right.
Like Pennsylvania, you don't have that concept of distance, and it's a far drive. It's a far drive now, and I know how far 127 miles is. And when I discovered that this stuff wasn't just happening in the Pacific Northwest, it was happening at home and close to home, it was a game changer for me. So I got online, started researching and connecting with people, and I connected with Stan in the late 90s, early 2000s, probably about 99 to 2000. What happened is there was a fireball, a meteorite that went over Bowman Field and landed in a field not far from where I was visiting a lady friend. I was 16, 17 years old. She was babysitting. You couldn't let your imagination, folks. I was a younger Studley or Fort Chop. And I remember that thing making an impact, and it was so violent, it threw me across the room.
Wow.
It's like a sonic boom. That's how impactful this was. And no hyperbole there. Like, we were really close to that impact of where that struck. And so I contacted Stan to see if he had any idea, because we wanted to go up pretty far, and we were turned around by people that, you guys don't need to be up here. And of course, when you're that age, you're like, oh, something weird happened. Was it a UFO or something like that? And here, you just, turns out to be a basic meteorite, right?
Sure.
or whatever. So not as interesting, but Stan emailed me back telling me exactly what had happened. I shared my experience. And then later, when I started getting active in the Bigfoot research, I came across Stan again. Eric Altman, my mentor, who's a guy that's pretty, well known in Bigfoot circles and, for PA Bigfoot research. He was kind of a mentor of Stan Gordon, or Stan Gordon was his mentor. He was a mentee, and Eric was my mentor. So Stan was kind of my mentor's mentor. So I got the relationship started and built through that. And then as Stan got to trust me, he would throw me some reports and some information every once in a while that he wouldn't, just give off to anybody else. He's a good dude, really nice guy, but he's very passionate about what he does, and he just doesn't share it easily. And some people are a little off put by that, but it came to him. It's really his what to do with it, right? I'm just thankful he does share things with me and others when he can.
You mentioned the meteorite. One of the things that kind of interests me, but I've always been on the fence about, is the loud noises, the atmospheric booms. And that was another thing that was mentioned.
Yeah.
Some of the noises there.
Yeah. No definitive reasoning or rationale as to why they happened. But also there were stories from Fayette County, which is, real close to the Westmoreland area, of a dragon.
A dragon.
Being seen on the Chestnut Ridge. A dragon. And they talk about it just very briefly, an invasion on Chestnut Ridge. But yeah, there was a dragon observed. Let me pull it up and see if I can find out exactly what year. It's just fascinating stuff. So here you go. March 18th, 2012, the Fayette County dragon. March 18th, 2012, in the southern part of Fayette County, a man was walking his dog in a rural location at about 11:45 p.m. He was in the front yard and away from any lights when his attention was drawn to look upwards after hearing a whooshing sound coming from overhead. Flying above him at a distance of about 55 feet was a large flying creature that looked like a dragon. As the flying creature passed over an automatic dusk to dawn light, the witness was able to get a good look at the strange flying animal. The body was about 22 feet long with a wingspan of 18 feet wide and looked to be shiny with almost a reflective body with no scales. The color was dark, possibly brown and red, similar to auburn brown. At the end of the tip of the wings, there appeared to be talon-like fingers of about 3 to 4 in number. The arms of the wing structure appeared muscular. The wings were quite thick, not like skin. There appeared to be a rear fin on both sides of its body, and the creature displayed an arrowhead-shaped tail. So an arrowhead-shaped tail is weird wording there, Mike. I'm sorry. The witness also saw what appeared to be 2 extended rear legs. The creature had a cone shape around the head, and it stopped flat on the base of the neck. So it obviously was just recently neutered. So that's your creature.
As everyone should have, your dragon spayed or neutered.
Get your dragon spayed or neutered. That's right. The oddest physical feature, as if the cone wasn't odd enough, was that the witness mentioned to me that the mouth and eyes were illuminated with a very ominous orange glow. As the creature flew over a tree at the bottom of the yard, moved off in the distance, the fellow heard a deep, throaty sound similar to the foghorn on a boat. The entire observation lasted about 20 seconds. Now, think about that. 20 seconds doesn't seem like a lot of time.
Oh, it's a long time. It's a long time.
If you and I sat here in silence for 20 seconds, people would be like, what the hell's going on?
Yeah.
Did the show end?
Yeah.
So 20 seconds is a long time.
There was another mention of a guy that saw something. It was during a segment where they were talking about Thunderbirds, but basically said it looked like a flying manta ray in the sky.
Yeah. Now, Lon Strickler from Phantoms and Monsters, these flying rays for probably, I want to say 2010 to probably 2018, we were getting reports, or he was getting reports, I say we because I belong to his research group, of these flying rays pretty consistently. A couple times a year, we were getting reports of these. And to me, that's a strange anomaly in itself. Like, is there some sort of flying ray? Like, would it be beyond the realm of some sort of flying fish?
I mean, that's a long way from the ocean.
Yeah, but if it's a species we haven't documented, is it that unreasonable to assume it could exist?
I mean, I don't know. I feel like we've just thrown ourselves down the rabbit hole of weirdness of Chestnut Ridge already.
You're right. And we haven't even talked about the Bigfoot the lady shot outside her trailer that exploded into light.
Let's take some baby steps, okay? Let's start with the ambulance drivers seeing the Bigfoot cross the road.
And that was recent. That wasn't even that far in the past. I actually, if you go watch that episode, Sasquatch Unearthed, I don't know what the episode's titled specifically, but it was Eric Altman's sister was one of the ambulance personnel that witnessed the road crossing.
You were at the spot where it happened.
Yep, I was at the spot where it happened.
Obvious for reasons, they're showing the side of the road. It's got some crazy traffic. You guys almost got hit by a car or a truck driving by, I think.
Yeah, you hear me mention that. I think several, like, geez, we're going to get pecked off this road. It's a frequented road most of the time. There are some times it's just desolate, but it's not a road I would play around on, put it that way.
Yeah, because I mean, there's hardly any shoulder right there to speak of, and it's a pretty steep embankment right there on that side of the road.
Yeah. Did they show me trying to get up it? Because I failed miserably trying to get up that.
I did not see that. I just saw you crossing the road, and it took you about 20 steps or so. And they said that this thing crossed the road in about 3 steps.
Yeah. If you listen to me, I really butchered the math because I wasn't paying attention. I just guessed them because I really wasn't counting my steps. I was just like, you've seen the traffic on that road. I was just trying to get across the street before it got hit by another car. And it's dangerous. And like, I'm laughing about it because if you got to go back and watch that video, like how many times we almost get hit just trying to reenact it. Or, just walking from the vehicles to the area where the encounter happened. And like you said, where the thing crosses the road, like it's a field on one side and then the embankment over into, another wooded rural area. But that embankment is not an easy embankment. It's steep. Nobody in their right mind should attempt that in a hoax situation or what. Like, it's dangerous.
Well, that's kind of what I was getting at, because they said that, I believe it was Eric who had put out flyers in the area at some shop nearby and talked to somebody who said that somebody else had reported a road crossing right in that same general area. So you're thinking like, oh, well, maybe it's somebody, trying to be funny, because there is a house right there. I did see that.
There is.
But then whenever you see like the logistics and the direction it was crossing, where it's not crossing towards the house, it's crossing away, I wouldn't have the guts to dress up in a costume and try to make it up that embankment with no guarantee that I'm not going to fall right in front of the vehicle coming at me.
No, sure. And I'm sure the people who live in that house are just so happy that busy road's there. I bet you it's a pain in the ass to get in and out of your house.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
On that road.
Is there like a pet cemetery nearby?
Poor little Gage. As we were saying though, like I would rule out hoax immediately, because just for safety factors, it'd be an incredibly stupid maneuver for somebody to try and pull one over on somebody, particularly at the time that this event happened. Also, it's emergency personnel. Like, I just don't know. Like, the event of that being a likelihood, I would say misidentification well before I would say anything about a hoax.
Yeah.
Like I said, I would say misidentification, but even then, I would still put my trust in what these folks seen. They're professional people. No reason to make it up.
No.
Really not.
So there was a house right there. Did you ever talk to the people that lived at the house?
I did not. I came into this one. This was already investigated. I was brought on scene to kind of do the reenactment and to ask some questions while we were there. The homeowners weren't available to us, nor do I know if they actually went to talk to the homeowners about the situation. And I don't even know if you think they would even be aware of it. You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those things that's so rare that local people would know that this happened in their neighborhood. Like, I don't know about you. I might go up to the door and say, hey, folks, you got some strange shit going on around your house? Because I think it just said a Sam Squanch, running across the street in front of you. That's me, but I don't know how many other people would do that.
Right. I mean, here in Oklahoma, I just make the natural assumption that, like, oh, so the Bigfoot was messing around at that house and probably looking through the windows and messing with the garbage, and that's probably what's there.
I say that, but when I was going up to the ridge with Dave and Cindy Dragusin, both who have passed away, we had got stopped by some folks as we were going up the ridge, and they asked us what we were doing. We told them what we were out here and what our whole purpose was out there. They lived out that way, and they just talked to us plainly, like, oh yeah, we hear these things all the time. They hear the vocalizations of these creatures all the time. Dave and I just thought that was outstanding. That we're going up here to investigate some sighting reports and to do some night recon, and we just get flagged by these folks wondering what all this whole group of strange people is going up the road past their house. And to them, it's second nature. Like, oh yeah, we know these things exist. So it's like some of the locals are very knowledgeable about the things that are residing on the ridge. They may not know what they are, or may not have put a face to the identity. But when we told them what we were doing, they were very believable, and they were very like, oh yeah, well, we hear that all the time.
What are some of the more like standout Bigfoot stories of the area that you can remember?
Well, in the 70s, near the Gray Station, that same area I was telling you, there is a trailer park that was back there. And one night, somebody residing in one of those trailers heard some commotion, and a Bigfoot had ripped the electrical panel off the side of their house. Their electrical service ripped it off the side of their trailer home.
Like the weatherhead?
Like the whole metallic box just ripped it right off the side of the trailer.
Wow.
Not only was there a flap in 1973, like I told you, but like from 1982 to 84, there's a ton of 81 to 84, there's a ton of sightings that also happened in that general vicinity. So something like, and I wish I could tell you why. What part of that what was going on at that time? It's like Stranger Things shit. Think about that.
You know, you're talking about the electrical box, and then they made mention of, you know, electric lines and power substations and things like that being associated with sightings of Bigfoot and UFOs and everything else. So my good friend Bob Domingos kind of came to a realization a few years back and mentioned this to me. And it's, you know, in the Bigfoot community, we hear a lot about infrasound. I myself have experienced symptoms while out in the field.
I have too.
We go to infrasound because a lot of us, in terms of research, are out there looking for a physical being. And we know that there are other biological creatures out there that use infrasound. So the theory is that Bigfoot could possibly be using infrasound as some sort of mechanism, and we're feeling the effects of that. Well, Bob pointed out that from the paranormal research side, the symptoms of EMF are pretty much identical to the symptoms of infrasound exposure. Whenever you start talking about EMF, now you're bringing up electrical boxes being torn off something. You're talking about these power substations that are emitting a huge amount of EMF. I mean, I wonder if there's some connection there in terms of Bigfoot. Maybe they're sensitive to electromagnetic frequencies. Maybe they can emit it themselves because, I mean, everything has an electrical frequency that's living. It just makes me wonder, especially with the story of pulling the electrical box off.
So that happened August 25th, 73. Woman in a trailer court saw a huge black creature around 7 feet tall rip open an electrical box attached to a trailer. A woman resident screamed and the creature fled the area. It left behind three-toed footprints.
Three-toed footprints.
Three-toed prints, just like Boggy Creek, right?
Yeah.
You know, you start going around the 70s, for some reason, these three-toed creatures are seen. Now, I was talking to Matt Arner last night, and he's wondering that maybe they're not three-toed, they're just three-toed that leave an impression, and they found a way to walk safer on their feet, especially through treacherous terrain, so they're not going to, you know, break appendages or expose anything to something venomous or harmful that could, you know, hurt them. So it's just an interesting hypothesis he posed, was that maybe they just walk a little differently or imprint a little differently because of the terrain or area they happen to be walking in.
That's something that a lot of people tend to forget, is that, you know, you talk about prints and track impressions. That's not necessarily the shape of the foot. That's just, you know,
right,
the movement of the
it's
foot.
An impression it was left.
Right. I think that's a really interesting theory.
And me too. And it was one of the first times somebody had particularly brought that one up to me. And it's something to consider, particularly in the South where these things are going through the, you know, the swamps, right? Where,
right,
you know, an exposed pinky toe could be the difference between life or death, with something getting a hold of you or biting it or, you know, and envenenating you or what have you. Not that much different in certain areas of Pennsylvania either, with the different types of venomous snakes that we have. So maybe they just learn to walk a little safer. Just something to think about, right? But the fact that this thing ripped the electrical panel off, just the concentration, specifically because of the concentration of events that happened in that area from the 70s into the 80s. Like, if it was like certain parts of PA where you get like a Bigfoot sighting every 10, 15 years, it's one thing. But you're talking about hundreds of reports in that 10-year span. That's extremely irregular. That is not normal. And by any standard of any measurement of data we have for Bigfoot sightings across the board, give me another area that's had a high concentrations of sightings like that consistently for that long of a time. Even Fouke, Arkansas, where we talk about the Boggy Creek monster, yeah, it's had a decent amount of sightings from the 1905 to today, but they're not concentrated like they are in this particular region of Pennsylvania.
No, not at all.
And to keep in mind that you're still talking probably 15 to 20 reports a year that happen from that place that we know about. That's people reporting them. And with so many different outlets, either through Facebook pages or emails or websites, you have no real way of knowing how many reports are coming in on a daily basis anymore.
I mean, there's no way to even come up with a true number, but for the sake of argument, what percentage of sightings do you actually think make it to the internet and get reported?
Well, probably, and I think that would change. I think a year ago, I'd probably say maybe 5% of the sightings that happen actually make themselves to us. Now, I'm talking about the entirety of since they've happened, right? Not a year,
right?
The entirety. But now, because TV is making it a little bit more cooler, I think you might have maybe about 20% of sightings that are reported now. Because if you think about it through the different outlets, they are reported more frequently. But I still think there's a ton of reports out there that don't happen because people are still afraid to share what they see. Not everybody shares that security that they're not going to be made fun of and called a loser, an idiot, or a freak. That's still a scary thing for some people to make that leap, particularly people that experienced these things back in the day when it still was very taboo. And the sad thing is those folks are dying out.
Recently on Facebook, there's been it's just a screenshot basically where somebody's gone to the BFRO website and captured the report table for state by state as it is current, and posting that and asking, how accurate do you think this is?
Well, I can tell you it's not at all.
Not at all.
Because that doesn't take into consideration what's in flats.
Right.
The behind the scenes database that we don't get to see how many reports that are there that are just haven't even been vetted yet or gone through or posted for public consumption. So right away, we already know that number's not true. But also when you look at the other regional websites, the PA Bigfoot Society, there's 500-600 reports that we probably have taken since its inception in 2000. And going back and looking at historical records of Bigfoot sightings, and the BFRO says 127.
Yeah.
That's not right. That's not accurate.
I mean, just using myself as an example, whenever I had my sighting, I did fill out a report. It's on Bobby Short's old website, Bigfoot Encounters. But that's the only place I reported it. I didn't send it to the BFRO. I didn't send it to any other database because I was like, well, I already reported it, so there's no need to report it anywhere else.
Well, BFRO gets the recognition because they've been around since 1995.
Sure.
And they were on Finding Bigfoot. That was the whole marketing behind the BFRO.
But like you said, we both know that the reports that get made public and posted publicly on the BFRO website is not by any means their entire database.
No.
Or their log of reports that they're still currently going through.
Right.
And then on top of that, that's just one website. There's other websites out there with reporting databases that include reports that aren't on BFRO.
Right. And then you have the Bigfoot Mapping Project.
Yeah. I am so thankful for that. I hope it continues to grow. I think that's a wonderful resource, the Bigfoot Mapping Project.
I am too. The only concern I have is particularly in PA, depending on where they're getting the data from. The concern I always had is that a lot of the data that was taken from the Pennsylvania Bigfoot Society database, we never got authorization with those witnesses to share those on anything besides the PA Bigfoot Society website.
Oh, yeah.
So now we're taking witness information that, should be in public domain. I get that. It's a technicality that bothers me because those areas, if not vetted by the right people, you're putting a place mark in somebody's backyard.
Right.
Without thinking that Pennsylvania is not like a lot of other states. Pennsylvania is a lot of private property. It's not a lot of state property. There's a lot of rules and regulations that go with trespass, and you could be putting yourself in sticky situations if you're not careful about the information that you're posting. And if you're doing a generalization, that's fine, but I really feel that the specificity of it is what's going to get us in trouble, because that information was never meant to be mass posted out like that. Because the question's very vague. Do you mind if we share this information on our website? No, go ahead. What information? I don't think anybody at that point saying you're going to put their home address out on the internet.
Right.
So that's where I get a little taken aback by the mapping projects, but they're very important tools. I think, because this goes back to, and it's actually critical to what we're talking about here in the Chestnut Ridge. When I founded the Keystone Bigfoot Project in 2012, one of the things we wanted to do was we used Google Earth, right, as our resource, and we mapped all the Bigfoot sightings we had in our databases on Google Earth. What we wanted to do was go in and be able to filter that out further by time of year. Well, filter it by year, by decade, by moon phase, by weather conditions. Like there's a lot of data points you could extrapolate there and show in the, query that data, pull up a couple keywords and have that information right in front of you. That was what we wanted to do.
Right.
Do you know how hard that is?
I do, because I was part of a project that was also wanting to do that at one point in time. And we were like,
it was incredibly hard.
Yeah.
So, like it's damn near impossible. And at that time, the tools weren't out there like there are today. Like 2012 doesn't seem like that long ago, but think about it. In the technology 11 years ago, technology is a lot different than it was 11 years ago.
Oh, there's been a huge jump.
Right. So it's a lot less manual now, a lot more automatic. But we were trying to do that with the Pennsylvania sightings. And, what was interesting, what we found, and this is something I found back when I had my old map with the push pins in it, was there's this large swath of Pennsylvania, which runs from that Chestnut Ridge through the, if you pull up Pennsylvania, right up that swash, like right through the middle, and it narrows right up into New York. Where all the frequent Bigfoot activity is. So it goes from the Chestnut Ridge up through Clearfield, over through Lycoming, McKean, Bradford counties, Tioga, a little bit over towards the eastern part of the state, and then right up into New York, where it funnels through and down into West Virginia. So it was just really interesting to see how that came to life on the maps. It was almost like a funnel, in a way, like an elephant trunk funnel cloud that went right up straight through. And that's only with what I considered shit data from north, central, and eastern PA, because up until I was really investigating, there was a couple investigators, Joe Biello, Earl, and Pat Dundor, so 3 people for the entirety of the Northeast, and nobody was reporting things very often. It's a very conservative part of the state. So we had to do boots on the ground, something Matt Arner and I are still doing today to get Bigfoot sightings out of those areas. We're starting to get reports from places that people have never talked to anybody about this stuff now. So as Bigfoot has become more popular in pop culture, we're starting to get a lot of that information in to enhance and enrich these databases, so we can get a little bit more accurate reads and accurate ideas of maybe, are there better times to deploy ourselves to particularly get, better evidence.
I've talked to a lot of witnesses on this podcast who have never reported their sighting.
Well, it's a trust thing, man. You got to build trust, right? And it's hard to do.
And then a lot of people that do report their sightings, they're never contacted by an investigator, or they never see their sighting actually get posted anywhere. Then you have people that just turn to social media, Facebook, for instance, and find a Bigfoot group, and they might share it in there eventually in the comments section, but they don't really think about officially reporting it anywhere. And I think the same goes with podcasts. I think, they come on the podcast and share their story, and they think, okay, well, that's good enough.
Well, I think we have to take all this data we get, Matt, and we still use it, right? Using our own method of sorting out what's good and what's bad. I think we still keep the data point. We just kind of put it off into another side. Like, this is an anecdotal report. This is actually more of a resource report, kind of back and forth. And then, of course, when they're bullshit, you call it bullshit. And I think sometimes, that's where it gets hard from putting my investigator's cap on, and through that investigator lens, like, so much of you wants to believe everybody, but you just know in your heart of hearts that that's not always going to be the case. Sometimes there are just going to be bad reports, right?
Sure.
What do you do with those bad reports? Are you irresponsible if you just throw them away? Or, do you still keep them just to have them? And I was just talking with Rick Fisher, David Spinks, and some guys at dinner when we were down at the Alba Twitch Festival. I'm name dropping a lot, but these are names that people don't hear about. And these are people that are really important to investigating, and because they've been doing it for over 20 years. And, some of those guys have had the same problem for 20 years. Well, you keep a hold of it, whether it's good or bad, you still put it out there and you let the people for themselves decide what's good or bad. To me, I don't know if that's, a real good process, but I guess it's good if you don't want to hurt anybody's feelings.
I mean, it's such a double-edged sword, though. Because if you put it out for public consumption, for instance, people can take that information and fabricate their own story for whatever purpose.
And I've said many times, we've created the world's greatest guide to hoaxing now with podcasts and everything else. The only thing that makes a difference is our ability to discern bullshit.
Right. But without keeping the data, you don't throw away data. That's how you find the patterns. But then if people start using that data to create new false data, then patterns emerge that are false patterns.
Yep. You're running down the rabbit hole.
I mean, we've been chasing we've been chasing that tail forever now. So
again, no, but this all relates to, we could just take this entire conversation and rope it back into what we were talking about on the Chestnut Ridge. You had hundreds of reports coming in that was being discerned by Stan Gordon and the folks investigating. And what happens, would this story be as dramatic if Stan Gordon said, well, this is bullshit, I'm not going to put it anywhere?
No, not at all.
It's become part of that lore, right? And, with lore, good or bad, there's always that point. And I think with everything we do, that there is up to people individually to call a certain amount of bullshit, right? Like, it's up to you to really decide what you want to believe, but it gets really dangerous when you're really looking for factual information. It's why I kind of abandoned the Keystone Bigfoot Project. It became hard to discern what's good data and bad data, and how do you display that? Because you talk about that witness that gets frustrated because they reported it and put it out there and nobody posted it. Well, maybe somebody didn't post it because they thought you were full of shit, but you don't want to hear that. And that's not something you'd want to tell somebody, but that's always the potentiality you have to think about. You and I might look at a report and see two different things, Matt.
Case in point, in the Facebook group I have for this very podcast, it's not a big group or anything. It's just a place where I can post my thoughts and stuff I run across or whatever to people that might be interested. But I posed the question, what percentage of reports do you think are true? Are actual sightings that people had, not just made up or misidentifications or whatever. And the results, the responses that people gave were really interesting. The people who I knew were actual field researchers and investigators, for whatever that's worth. All of them were saying 10% or less. All the people that were what I call Bigfoot enthusiasts, just maybe listeners of podcasts, things like that, they were all like 90%, 75%. And it's really interesting to see that divide, how researchers see that maybe 10% at best, 90% being misidentified animals or humans or people just lying and making up a story for some reason, whatever. But as a former investigator, to me, that 10% is amazing. And that's more than enough to go on.
It is. That 10% is a lot.
I mean, so even if those, hundreds of reports that came in in 73, even if 90% of them are just bullshit, that's still an amazing number and a lot of sightings.
It goes back to that John Green quote, right? Like, even at the end of the day, if all this was bullcrap and one sighting proved to be real, it was still worth it.
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing. That's not his direct quote, but like I think he surmises Sasquatch shapes among us with that very thought. And it's something that I hold, to value, even if one report is proven to be real, this has been worth it. And yeah, we've sifted through a lot of crap, but it's what makes this amazing. It's what makes this journey incredibly fulfilling, is that you think about that, Matt, we're part of a group of a handful of people in the population that goes out and is part of this. A part of people, humanity, that said, you know what, we don't care if you think we're crazy. There's a mystery to be solved here. Good or bad, hoax or real, like, we've spent the time and, put the effort and energy in to talk about it, bring it to attention, and to create a call to action to take this a lot more seriously than brushing it off as, Saturday morning cartoons or Friday night B movies. We've done our due diligence, so yeah, I guess when some people get upset when people call themselves experts, but you think about that, we have done the expert work.
Yeah.
If you go by the FBI definition of what an expert is, there are many people in this field that have earned the right to call themselves an expert. You don't have to be an expert of something that's proven to be right, but you can be an expert in the methodologies you use to land it. And I would put my investigation skills pretty much on par with criminal investigators, because I've spent a lot of time with criminal investigators to hone my skill on being a better investigator.
I mean, I don't think anybody's an expert on the subject, but I think there's a lot of experts on the subject matter.
No, but you know what? You say that as it may, but there are people out there that are walking encyclopedias, chapter, line, and verse, can tell you everything about these Bigfoot books.
Henry May.
And those people are very valuable. Henry May, right? I could pick up a phone at any time of day and say, Henry, I thought I heard this somewhere. Where does this sound familiar? Well, Fort Chop, it's in this book. And he'd walk me through it.
Yeah.
And, so how do you not call someone like that an expert? You're an expert in the literature that's out there on this. So I think we have to get shying away from using some of those terms. Not that any of us are experts, but let's not be afraid of labels. Let's just be afraid of not being good enough to discern good reports from bad reports. And let's just not be irresponsible and throw everything away just because on a whim that something doesn't measure up to, what standard we currently have. Because my standards have changed.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but over the years, my standards have changed.
Oh, 100%.
You know me. You've known me for 20 years. There were times I would never entertain a conversation about a paranormal Bigfoot. It would be offensive to me. And now, over the years and the experience you get from researching, when you're left scratching your head that says, hey, what the hell is this? I can't explain this with anything rational. That's a unique place to be at. Coincidentally, that's about 95% of what happens on the Chestnut Ridge. I can't explain it. I was out last year with Eric Altman, Rick Chirby, his fiance, now his wife, and Tom Mehoke, and my son, Adam Cox. We were out there, and Rebecca, Rick's wife, had filmed these non-localized lights moving around in the trees. Nothing's creating that light phenomenon. There's nothing on the ground I can identify. There's these free floating orbs of light floating through the trees, Matt. I have no explanation for it. She's got it on tape.
So what's going on there? What is...
I wish I did.
Because we're not talking about like a location where it's not like the size of somebody's backyard. It's a vast region.
It is. And strange things are happening up and down this area. But why? Is it the quartz deposits? Is it energy being stored and being released? Is it, we could go down, we could spend hours tripping it up, and it still doesn't explain the Bigfoot sightings. It still doesn't explain the dragon, which somebody could have been puffing the magic dragon before that happened. I don't know. It said he was walking his dog. He could have been doing the ganja. We don't know that. But there's a lot of unexplained things that happen, and we're limited by what we know in today's science. And if we don't look at these things and maybe investigate them later, where new methods and new technologies have come out to help us, we're just irresponsible. We threw them away when maybe 5 years from now, we might have something better, Matt, that says, hey, you know what? I know have an answer for those damn lights.
I'm kind of at the point after all of it where I'm not so sure UFOs are part of the phenomenon happening at Chestnut Ridge as much as maybe they're just there observing it like we are.
Well, hey, why not? It's an interesting place to be. It definitely needs some eyes and more attention to it. There's an intrepid group of investigators that spend a lot of time down there now. You still got Eric Altman and Tom and those guys on the ridge, far more qualified. I'll tell you 100% of the time, I'm no expert on the ridge. I'm a special guest visitor. And I've been there a handful of times actually more than a handful of times over there. I've been there quite a bit through the years. And it's a different place. There's never been a place I've been that's given you quite the feeling you get when you're there. It's different. It's eerie. And sometimes you wonder if it's the mind playing tricks with you. But it's more than that. There's a feeling you get when you're there that it's entrapping. It makes you want to spend more time there.
One more thing before we cut out of here. just a subject, one of the many things that fascinates me about Bigfoot and also just mystifies me entirely. The eye shine phenomenon, where people report the Bigfoot eyes glowing red and producing their own luminescence, basically.
Yeah. Billy Willard and I experienced that on the ridge.
2 independent reports contained within the Small Town Monsters series about the ridge, where people claim to see the eyes turn red, where they weren't red before and they were in close proximity to the Bigfoot and actually saw the eyes as they turned red.
Yeah, we didn't see the reddish color. We saw the bioluminescent kind of color as they gloss over and shine. It wasn't red by any means, but I'll tell you, as we were leaving that area, because a storm just started dropping gallons of rain on us buckets of rain as we were going through, there was probably a softball-sized rock lobbed between myself and Billy Willard that damn near hit me in the face. It would have broke my nose. It was a big rock, and it was lobbed between the two of us, which was kind of even more of an impetus for us to get out of there.
Mm-hmm.
But Billy Willard and I shared that experience together. He'd tell you about it. And it wasn't anything exciting or out of this world, or, it wasn't a scary situation. We heard some movement, saw some eyes shine. It started pouring down rain. We decided to leave. Rock was thrown at us. And that was kind of the end of the night, because we still had about another mile and a half to walk to the cars in the pouring down rain. But it was definitely an evening to remember. And that was not far away from where the lady had the electrical box ripped off her trailer.
So weird. I mean, you have like all these classic things attributed to Bigfoot activity, like you're talking about the rock throwing, different vocalizations, wood knocks, road crossings, things of that nature. And then you also have all this high strangeness and weirdness going on in the same area, and a few weird paranormal type Bigfoot reports mixed in over the years as well.
I had a report from a very respectable researcher I've spent a lot of time with over the years, who a couple years ago, I think it's been a couple years ago now, told me he saw a doorway open in the woods, a portal open and close right in front of him.
Wow.
And this is not somebody I'd have had doubts in before. And he told me, and honestly, I doubted him at first, but the more I heard his story, the more I kind of like, what the hell did he witness? What did he see? Why, of all the times he's been doing this for over 30 years, why all of a sudden now did he see something like this? And why am I questioning him? He's never told a story like this for 30 years. All of a sudden something happens and now I'm questioning him. Like, what's wrong with me? This guy experienced something he cannot explain. He's obviously stunned by it. And all I could think of is, man, what the hell's wrong with you? As I've changed my mindset, I told you over the years, because there's no reason. What do you get out of that? Like another researcher telling a researcher, man, I saw some shit. Would that, that'd be like me telling you, Matt, you know what I mean? Oh, what the hell? What happened to Forker? He done flipped his gourd.
Yeah, but it's just natural for us to do that. I mean, whenever you have somebody that you've known for so long and, okay, I can trust this person. They're very well grounded. They don't tell me anything crazy.
Yeah.
And then they come to you with something like that. I think it's pretty natural to disbelieve them at first.
Yeah. And, I have a little shame about it, because I'm like, man, even having my own encounter in 2012, like I was very reluctant to tell people about it because of how it made me feel. And, here I go, one of my, close acquaintance of mine that did the research. And here I am struggling to believe him when, I was just in his shoes probably 8 years ago,
Yeah.
So it's a little messed up, but it's, it's there. But this area, man, the Chestnut Ridge, like, Small Town Monsters has done a little bit on it, a lot of it. They've done the invasion on Chestnut Ridge, did the first season of Sasquatch Unearthed, but that just tells the stories that we know about and, kind of illustrates it better for an audience that needs to understand it better. But there's so much more there that's beneath the surface that people haven't seen, and so much more that hasn't been shared that I don't know if you could do 10 seasons on the Chestnut Ridge and it would even share all the stories of what's happened in that place. Considered you could talk to many different prominent researchers in PA and experiencers and still get stories. But it's just insane.
Chestnut Ridge. It sounds like a crazy place.
And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful place.
And it's not the only place out there like it. I mean, obviously, Skinwalker Ranch is probably the most famous one. But there are these places out there that seem to be, I don't know, doorways or something where there's just no rules. There's no rules.
And we really have to think about what the rules are anymore.
Sean Forker of the Sasquatch Experience, thank you, sir, for joining me once again and talking about Chestnut Ridge.
It's always a pleasure, my friend, to sit down and talk with you.
If you've encountered Bigfoot or something else you can't explain, email me at bigfootcrossroads@gmail.com.